So, okay. The reason why I'm here today is because we have some really hot funding issues going on in Sacramento right now, and all of us in the room can make a difference right now. We're having a county-wide letter writing campaign on these funding issues, and I wanted to walk you through it because, you know, PTA, we are an advocacy organization. Let's see if we can, sorry. And so we have an opportunity to advocate for our students right now in this upcoming month before the budget is passed June 15th. And so, you know, as Peggy mentioned, you know, we are an advocacy organization. We've been an advocacy organization since 1897, and these are just some of the things we can be real proud of that we as an organization have done historically. We brought about kindergarten, child labor laws, school nurses, the list goes on, and because I'm short of time, I'm not going to go through it all, but these slides are on the 6th District PTA website, and it's just, we should be real proud to be PTA because there's really great things we have done, and we have opportunity now in the upcoming month to really help our kids with school funding. Real quickly, and this is going to give away my age and some of your other ages possibly, but I'm just curious how many people attended California schools in the 1970s when we were the top schools in the country. Yeah. California schools, a lot of people forget, we had the best schools, K-12. We were the model of the country. We were the envy of the country. Now, does anybody know where we ranked, before we passed Prop 30, where did we rank on per pupil spending? If anyone wants to take a guess, where do you think we ranked out of the 50 states?
You should get this off.
You're fired. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We were 47th. Now we passed Prop 30 and everything is better, right? Well, now we are 49th. The way it's described is Proposition 30 stopped the bleeding. The California legislature, we had to fund the transfer of prison inmates to the local county jails. That was a $6 billion transfer out of the general fund. So Prop 30, we put $6 billion back in temporarily. So I'm going to walk you through it. Next slide. So this is where we have been for the last 25 plus years. We've been spending below the national average. We've been spending below the national average since we passed Prop 13 right around here. We need $20 billion more just to reach national average spending. We're spending about $3,342 less per student than just the national average. Next. And when you don't spend on education, this is what happens. We are now 50th in the number of teachers per students. We are 49th in the number of guidance counselors. We're 50th in librarians and nurses. And we are, another question people raise, are we top heavy? Are we spending too much on administration? Well, we're actually 46th in the number of administrators. States outside of California have, I want to get this right, one administrator for every 200 students, and in California we have one administrator for every 300 students. So you get what you pay for. This is where top performing states now in the United States. Where we were back in the 1970s, we were a top performing state. Now these are the top performing states, and they spend about $16,000 to $22,000 per student. And here we are down with Mississippi, spending down at the bottom. And these are the top performing states, they weren't ranked by top spending, they were ranked by top performing, but they happen to fall also at the higher end of spending. When you don't spend, this is what happens. We're spending about $8,000 to educate a kid. If a child gets into trouble and we don't have counselors at the schools anymore to help those kids, we're spending $225,000 a year when that kid's in California Youth Authority. And if that child does not make it through our school system and runs into trouble with criminal justice, we are now spending $47,000 a year to incarcerate adults. More than half of our inmates are now high school dropouts. And for the first time in California history, corrections funding now exceeds higher ed funding. So when we're talking about school funding, the one thing you need to know is who are we educating? When we're trying to figure out, well, we're at the bottom, how we bring us back up to the top, who are we trying to educate? So We have about 6 million students in K-12. Half, this is a really big number, half of them are in a low-income family growing up in poverty. That's a unique challenge just to California. And also we have about 38%, and that number is growing, for English learners. These are two unique challenges to California not faced in other states. Special ed kids, we're about average with about 10%. So now, this is what's coming up. We have the Prop 30 funds, and Governor Brown is proposing, he has a proposal out there what to do with those funds. Just keep in mind, my key point is, he's not talking about adding any more money. He's talking about just redistributing what we have at our 49th level of funding. So he wants to take about half the money from Prop 30, 1.8, to pay down the deferrals to school districts that we've been balancing our budgets in California by deferring payments to school districts. He wants to start paying that deferral down. I believe the number is about $10 billion that needs to be paid down. So he wants to apply about half of it to the pay down. The other half, he wants to apply to a new school funding formula. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is this new school funding formula that he's interested in implementing for this fall. Okay. This is the existing way that we fund. Oh, thank you. Can you hear me? Say hello? Yes. Yeah, this is the hello. This is the existing way that we fund school districts. Just a quick show of hands to know whether I need to go through this. Are people familiar with the terms revenue limit and basic aid? Okay, so real quickly, what exists now is school districts have a revenue limit set by the state of how much the state will fund per student. If the local property taxes are below that limit, the state supplements it. Those are the revenue limit school districts, which are about 90% of the school districts. Then about 10% of our school districts are what's called basic aid school districts, where their local property taxes are above that per student limit that the state has said every student should get in California, so they keep their extra. And what's interesting is the number of basic aid districts is growing. And it's not growing because they have more money. It's growing because the state's been lowering that revenue limit. So if the state lowers it, all of a sudden you're a basic aid, but you don't have any additional funds. So this is our current system, and everyone agrees it needs to be fixed. It's just a huge diversity in how much kids are funded throughout the state, so there's huge agreement across the board that we need to fix it. Next slide. So what the governor's proposing is called local control funding formula. It's going to replace the revenue limits. It's going to replace most of the state categorical, and he's going to phase it in over the 7 years that we have the Prop 30 funds. Okay. So this is the formula. He's going to start with a base grant for every student in California. Then he's going to add 35% for students that are in what we call the needy groups of being low income, English learners, or foster children. Then there's going to be another 35% added in if those, for school districts who have a higher concentration of these needy kids. So in school districts that are over 50% of these needy kids, for every kid over, that child gets another 35%, and then there's some add-ons and augmentations. So see the next slide, I've kind of drew you a picture of it. There's the base grant, and then the supplement, we add another 35% for the needy kids, another 35% for high concentration districts, plus a few of the add-ons. Next slide. So here's the first topic of concern is what is that base grant? As we know, top performing states now pay about 16 to 22 per student. That's what top performing states. New York, by the way, spends about $19,000 per student. The national average is around $11,000 per student. Here's our proposed base grant for California, and that is a goal for 2021. This is not the money that's even allotted for next fall. This is where the goal is for the base grant. So what if you are in a school district that doesn't have a lot of kids in poverty, or doesn't have a lot of kids who speak English as their second language? That's what you're getting. Who can educate a kid for that amount of money when the other states are spending $19,000 and $16,000 to $22,000? So that is one very serious concern about the formula. Next slide. We talked about the supplemental grant and the concentration grant. The other interesting point is that The English language students would only be eligible for 5 years of that grant. That's something that people are wondering, will a student be ready to be out of the program in 5 years? And how will that impact the schools? Next slide. These are some of the augmentations I talked about. What's interesting to me is you get additional funds for class size reduction, but the class size reduction figure that was negotiated with the governor is 24-1. The national classroom size, once you get out of California, is 15-1. It's 15-1 outside of California, but we negotiated to get an augmentation if you get down to 24-1. Some more add-ons that are very controversial. Homeschool transportation and this TIG grant. 70% of that TIG grant is only going to 4 school districts. Next. So so all this money is going to go to the local school district. The base grant, the add-ons, the augmentations are completely discretionary for the local school district. The supplemental and concentration grants that are to help the kids in need, the English learners, this is the directive. Available for any purpose that benefits the student generating the funding. So, do you think kids need clean desks? A school district is saying, well, the needy kids in our district, we spent the money on a janitor because they need clean desks. So there is a lot of concern here that this is a lack of direction of what to do with the money that is specifically supposed to help get children out of poverty and help our English learners. We know a lot of things that help them. Maybe a lot of other states, what they do in their formulas is they say, block grants, spend it on this purpose. Give local school boards some direction of, if this money is to help kids get out of poverty, this is what works to get those kids out of poverty, as opposed to, the concern is this could just be spent on anything not particularly helpful to those kids. Next slide. So, the impact on the categorical fundings is that it does simplify it, which is needed. And these are the ones that would still remain. Special ed, school lunch programs, all the federal programs, after school education, safety, and preschool are not touched. Next. This is how LCFF is to be implemented. There will be an entitlement target calculated for every district. That entitlement target is supposed to be equal to what school districts received in 2012 and 2013. Every year thereafter, for the next 7 years, the money will be spent raising districts up to that entitlement target. So school districts that are above that entitlement target will see no additional funds for the next 7 years. Over the next 7 years, he's going to continue his plan to use half the Prop 30 money to pay down the deferrals and towards bringing the school districts that aren't even at the entitlement grant, bringing them up. Next slide. So this is the state PTA position, which I wanted to share with you. At the state level, we appreciate the need to simplify the formula. It's too complicated. Everybody agrees. That's not even being debated. And we all agree and appreciate that some kids definitely need additional funds. But here's the big concern. Right now, the governor has introduced LCFF as a budget trailer bill. It's going through as a purely financial matter. It's not going through any of the committee analysis. And so the state PTA position is no bill, no law. This is a significant shift. It's the most dramatic shift in how we fund education in California in the last few decades. It needs to go through the committees. It needs to go through our Assembly Education Committee. It needs to go through our Senate Education Committee so that we can have discussions about what should that base grant be in California. What does it cost to educate a kid in California? And then build a formula out from there. It's just critical to start the analysis just at that starting point, rather than as we have Assemblywoman Joan Buchanan. She's head of the Assembly Education Committee. I heard her speak recently, and how she describes LCFF is rearranging the chairs on the Titanic does not stop the ship from sinking. So she is leading the charge to say, get this through the committees and let's do it right. Let's figure out what should be the base grant so every student gets a full, well-rounded curriculum, and then let's figure out what should those supplements be. Should they be 10%? Should they be 25%? Should they be 35%? And how do we direct those funds to make sure that children in poverty and our English learners are actually benefiting from those funds? Oops, can you go back? Oh, yeah, we did. So additional local concerns, as I mentioned, there are school districts that simply will not be able to operate on that low base grant amount because they don't have English learners and kids in poverty. They'll find it extremely difficult to educate their child on that base grant. Districts above the entitlement target, they're going to be held flat for the next 7 years while their enrollment increases and their costs increase. Let's see. There is another problem is there's no regional cost of living adjustment. This formula is based on the Getting Down to Facts study, and that study includes the regional cost of living adjustment so that the dollars everywhere, everyone has the same purchasing power with their dollars. We're the only state that would not have that regional cost of living adjustment. There's about 30 states now that are implementing these formulas. So we strongly believe that we need to advocate for a regional cost of living adjustment. An interesting point for revenue limit districts who've had their state monies deferred and they're getting payments now back from the Prop 30 funds, they're only getting paid back for the principal on their loans. There's no payback for the interest they've had to pay on their loans. Finally, for basic aid districts have been doing voluntary contributions since 2009, so they're being held to their 2012 levels instead of 2009. They are not getting reimbursed for their voluntary contributions to the state. Next slide. So what's going to happen under LCFF for the next 7 years? Well, the Prop 30 revenues are going to end. The sales tax ends in 2016. The personal income tax ends in 2018. But in Prop 30 is the permanent transfer of $6 billion out of the general budget for the prison inmate transfer. So basically, I don't know people who understood this about Prop 30, but Prop 30 was a permanent shift of revenues out of the general fund from education to incarceration. Because this is a permanent $6 billion cut, and then the revenues are going to end in 7 years, and we've dug ourselves into a hole that we'll need to fill. Next slide. Other concerns about the formula is that the LCFF is dependent on continued improvement in the state and national economy, and that our revenues are very dependent on personal income taxes. In other states, that have higher, that pay more to educate a child, use a steady property tax revenue base. Next. Oh, okay, let's go back. So real quickly, the reason why I'm here today is because your 6th district has said, let's do something about this. We've been in conversations with Joan Buchanan, the Assembly Education Committee. We've been in conversations with the Senate, and they're saying send your letters now. Because the LCFF is actually proceeding along 3 tracks. One track is the governor introduced it as a budget item, but Assembly has now introduced it as a piece of legislation to go through the Assembly, and the Senate has now introduced it as a piece of legislation to go through the Senate. So our education leaders in the Senate and in the Assembly have reached out to PTA and said, please help us with letters. Please help us with letters that, yes, we need this reform, but we need to do it right. We need to do it right, so delay it 1 year so it can go through the committees and have the proper analysis. So I brought with me here the 6th district approved letter. So we're doing a county-wide letter writing campaign, and the letter's going to go to your local assembly person, your local senator, then it's going to go to the education committee chairs, and it's going to go to Brown. And basically what it's saying is got the points I've walked you through today, which is yes, we need to reform our funding system. It's inequitable, it's too complex, so we absolutely agree with that. But put it through the legislative process for a year. We need to do it right. We need to figure out what that base grant amount should be. We need to figure out what the supplements should be. And we need to make sure the supplements are spent in ways that will actually help the children they're meant to help. Our key point, third one, adequacy is the number one point for your state PTA, which is we have to adequately fund education. We cannot remain at 49th. That's not acceptable. So we all have the power. We are a 1 million member strong organization. We can send 1 million letters to Sacramento saying, we want to be back at the top where we were. We want to be back at the top. And just so you know, it's possible. Other states, New Jersey 10 years ago, they were at the bottom. And in 10 years, they went to the top. And Maryland, and Connecticut, and the Carolinas. This has happened across the country. This is doable. So don't listen to people say we can't do it, because yes, we can. Other states have done it. Maryland did it voluntarily. Other states have done it involuntarily by court order. This is completely doable. The couple other points in the letter that we have is we're asking the legislature to first figure out what does it cost to educate a kid. When they do that analysis, the one thing we know is that if you invest in preschool, that reduces the cost of later educating that child by 7 to 1. So we're asking the legislature, when you figure out how much it costs to educate a kid in California, please factor in universal preschool. Because right now in California, we don't have that. And right now in California, when that kid hits 2nd grade, we sit there, we bring in the remedial specialists. We've got 40 to 60% of our kids in 2nd grade are not at grade level. We bring a remedial specialist at 7 times the cost of preschool. So we're asking the legislature, consider bringing in preschool, and that'll be a huge savings in how much it costs to educate a child in California. We're also asking the legislature in this letter to consider investing in our teachers, because states that have done that have actually reduced their costs by a 3 to 1 ratio. Other states, so in California, in the first 5 years, we lose 1/3 of our teachers. That's a very high attrition rate. Other states that invest 2 years in teacher education and 1 year mentoring, their attrition rate is now down to 10%. So, 3-year investment in teachers brings in great teachers to our classrooms, it supports our teachers, and it also reduces our costs. That's the update. Again, I have these letters, I'll be handing them out, and I'm hoping that I can ask Peggy to collect them for me. But first, before I go, are there any questions? All right, well, what I would just do, because if you think about this information, number 1, it's on the 6th District website, and number 2, if you do come up with questions later, my email address is on this presentation. Thank you so much for letting me give this presentation at your party. I really appreciate it.